The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Mercy's Bend, painting everything in shades of burnt orange and deep crimson. Elias Kane rode into town on a horse that had seen better days, its coat dulled by countless miles of hard travel. He was a man who wore his hardships like a second skin-weathered face, calloused hands, and eyes that held shadows of things best left unspoken. The town sprawled before him like a wound in the desert landscape. False-fronted buildings lined the street, their paint peeling in the relentless heat. Men lounged on porches, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt, while saloon girls called from second-story windows. This was a place where law bent like heated metal, shaped by whoever held the most gold or the fastest gun. Elias dismounted at the edge of town, leading his horse toward the only establishment that might offer work to a drifter, Morrison's Horse Ranch, a sprawling operation that sat just beyond the town's ragged boundaries. The ranch supplied horses to anyone with coin enough to pay, from honest ranchers to men whose business was better conducted under cover of darkness. "Looking for work," Elias said simply to the foreman, a grizzled man named Buck Morrison, who sized him up with the practiced eye of someone who'd hired and fired 100 drifters. "Can you break horses?" Buck asked, noting the rope burns on Elias's hands, the way he stood, balanced, ready. "I can. $1 a day, bunk in the barn, meals included. Cause trouble and you're gone before the dust settles." Elias nodded. It was fair enough for a man with no references and dust for a past. He'd been working the corrals for 3 days when she appeared. The sound came first, the jingle of expensive tack, the clip of well-shod hooves, then the carriage, black lacquered wood that gleamed despite the dust, pulled by matched bays that cost more than most men saw in a lifetime. Clara Whitmore stepped down from the carriage with the practiced grace of someone who'd never known a world without servants to steady her elbow. Her dress was the color of sage, impractical for the desert, but beautiful in its defiance of the harsh landscape. Her father followed, James Whitmore, whose hands had never known honest work, but had signed enough foreclosure notices to bury half the county. "Morrison," the banker called out, his voice carrying the authority of wealth. "I hear you've acquired some Spanish bloodstock. My daughter requires a mount with proper breeding." Elias was working a young stallion in the round pen when their eyes met. He'd been focused on the horse, speaking low and steady, when he felt the weight of someone's gaze. Clara stood at the fence, gloved hands resting on the top rail, watching him with eyes the color of prairie sky after a storm. For a moment, the world narrowed to just that look, curious, intelligent, and utterly out of place in the brutal landscape of Mercy's Bend. Then the moment shattered as her father's voice cut through the air. "Clara, come away from there. These men are rough sorts." She turned slowly, as if waking from a dream, but not before Elias saw something flash in her eyes, a spark of defiance quickly smothered. Buck was already leading out the Spanish mares, sleek animals with proud necks and delicate legs. Elias went back to his work, but he could feel her presence like heat from a distant fire when he glanced up again. She was examining the horses with her father, but her attention seemed divided, stolen glances cast toward the round pen where he worked. The afternoon wore on. The banker haggled over prices while his daughter sat in the shade of the barn, fanning herself with slow, mechanical movements. Elias had seen caged birds with more freedom. He was filling water troughs when the gunshots rang out. 3 sharp cracks that echoed off the buildings, followed by shouts and the thunder of hooves. Raiders, probably drunk cowboys, deciding to shoot up the town for sport. Or worse, men with darker intentions. The horses in the corral went wild, rearing and spinning. Elias vaulted the fence, trying to calm them before they injured themselves or broke free. Through the dust and chaos, he saw Clara frozen beside the carriage, her father already inside, shouting for her to get in. A rider bore down on them, pistol raised, whether for robbery or just the cruel pleasure of frightening a banker's daughter. Elias didn't think. He grabbed a coiled rope from the fence post and sent it flying, catching the rider around the chest and yanking him from his horse. The man hit the ground hard, gun flying from his hand. By the time the dust settled and the sheriff's men had rounded up the troublemakers, Elias had melted back into the work of calming horses. No one had seen clearly who'd thrown the rope. In a town like Mercy's Bend, it was better to be invisible than heroic. But Clara had seen. As their carriage pulled away, new horse tied behind. She looked back. Their eyes met again across the dusty yard, and she placed a hand briefly over her heart, a gesture so quick he might have imagined it. The next weeks passed in the rhythm of ranch work. Elias rose before dawn, worked horses until his muscles ached, and fell asleep to the sound of coyotes calling in the distance. He'd chosen this life of drift and solitude years ago, after the law had taken its piece of him for defending a saloon girl from unwanted advances. 6 months in territorial prison for breaking a man's jaw, a man who happened to be the judge's nephew. It was a lesson in how justice worked in the territories. He thought he'd forgotten how to want anything beyond the next meal, the next mile. But sometimes, working the horses in the cool morning air, he'd catch himself looking toward the road that led to town, to the big white house on the hill where bankers lived like kings. It was a dangerous thought for a man like him. In Mercy's Bend, the distance between the ranch and that house might as well have been an ocean. Men had been shot for less than looking too long at what they couldn't have. But Clara Whitmore had her own ways of crossing distances. She'd taken to riding out from town, always with a groomsman trailing at a respectful distance, always taking the trail that passed by Morrison's ranch. The first time, Elias assumed it was coincidence. The third time, when her horse developed a convenient stone bruise right at their gate, he knew better. "Ma'am," he said, approaching carefully as she dismounted to examine her mare's hoof. "Can I help?" She looked up at him from under the brim of her riding hat, and he saw that spark again, the one that suggested there was more to her than silk dresses and finishing school manners. "I believe she's picked up a stone," Clara said, her voice carrying just a hint of amusement, as if they were sharing a secret joke. Elias knelt and lifted the mare's hoof. There was no stone, and they both knew it, but he made a show of cleaning the hoof anyway, buying them these few moments of almost legitimate conversation. "You're the one who stopped that rider," she said quietly. "Not a question, but a statement. Don't know what you mean, ma'am." "Of course not." She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her face from merely beautiful to something that made his chest tight. "My father would reward such a service, if he knew who to thank." "Some things aren't done for reward," Elias said, setting the horse's hoof down and standing. She studied him for a long moment, this banker's daughter who should have been looking through him like he was part of the landscape. "No," she said finally. "I don't suppose they are." Her groomsman was approaching now, concern creasing his features. Clara straightened, the mask of propriety sliding back into place. "Thank you for your assistance. Mr. Kane," he said. "Elias Kane. Mr. Kane." She mounted gracefully, gathering her reins. "Perhaps I should check my mare's shoes more carefully before riding out. That'd be wise, ma'am." She rode away, back straight, never looking back. But Elias stood there watching until she disappeared into the heat shimmer rising from the desert floor, knowing with the certainty of a man who'd made enough mistakes to recognize another one coming, that Clara Whitmore was going to be his undoing. That night, as he lay in his narrow bunk listening to the other ranch hands snore and mutter in their sleep, Elias stared at the barn rafters and tried to convince himself to leave Mercy's Bend come morning. A smart man would saddle up and ride out before whatever was building between them could take root. But when dawn broke over the desert, painting the world in shades of gold and shadow, Elias Kane was still there, working horses in the round pen, waiting for the sound of hoofbeats on the trail. The creek ran shallow and clear through a grove of cottonwoods, one of the few places where green things still grew despite the desert's thirst. Clara had come here since childhood, but today felt different. Today, she'd come to thank a man who wanted no thanks, and perhaps to understand why his indifference intrigued her more than all the rehearsed flatteries she'd endured from suitable suitors. She found him watering his horse, hat pushed back, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms marked by work and weather. He looked up at her approach, And she saw surprise flicker across his features before settling back into that careful neutrality he wore like armor. "Miss Whitmore," he said, straightening. "Your mare throw another shoe? No pretense today. Mr. Kane." She dismounted, leading her horse to the water. "I came to thank you properly, away from curious eyes." "Told you, nothing to thank me for." "My father disagrees. He's posted a reward for information about who helped us that day." Elias's mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. "Good luck to him. Then." They stood in silence, watching the horses drink. The cottonwood leaves whispered secrets overhead, and Clara found herself oddly reluctant to fill the quiet with the kind of empty conversation she'd been trained to make. "Why won't you take credit?" she asked finally. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, man in my position starts taking credit for things. People start noticing him. Sometimes it's better to be nobody. You're not nobody. To your world, I am. The truth of it sat between them like a third presence. Clara moved to a fallen log and sat, heedless of her riding skirt. After a moment's hesitation, Elias joined her, maintaining a careful distance. "Tell me about your world. Then," she said. He gave her a long look, as if weighing whether she truly wanted to know or was merely playing at understanding poverty like some did charity work. "Not much to tell. My mother died when I was 15. Consumption took her, though it was really the coal mine that killed her, the dust in her lungs from taking in washing from the miners. My father lasted another 2 years before a dispute over a gold claim went bad. Man shot him in the back, claimed self-defense. Judge believed him." The words came out flat, matter-of-fact, but Clara heard the weight beneath them. "After that, I drifted. Learned horses from an old Mexican who took pity on an angry kid. Learned fighting from men who didn't. Learned that the law's got nothing to do with justice, and money's got everything to do with both." "You were in prison," she said, not asking. 6 months. Beat a man who was forcing himself on a girl. She was 15, same age as my sister would have been if she'd lived past her first winter. He picked up a stick, broke it between his fingers. "Man I beat had connections. I didn't." Clara watched his hands as he spoke, noted the small scars, the crooked set of one finger that had healed wrong. Hands that had known violence. Yes, but also gentleness. She'd seen him with the horses. "My turn," he said suddenly. "What's a banker's daughter doing out here talking to ranch hands?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Trying to remember how to breathe. "When he waited," she continued, "my father sees me as an investment, something to be managed and eventually traded for the best return. Wallace Hartley owns 3 silver mines and needs a wife young enough to give him heirs. My father needs political influence to expand his banking territory. It's a sound business arrangement. Hartley's old enough to be your grandfather, young enough to have survived 2 previous wives," Clara said bitterly, "though there are questions about how the second one fell down those stairs." Elias's hand stilled. "When?" "The engagement will be announced next month. The wedding by Christmas." She stood abruptly, walked to the creek's edge. "I used to think I'd have choices. That's what education is supposed to give you, isn't it? But all my French and piano and poetry, it just makes me a more expensive commodity." She heard him rise, come to stand beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his presence like heat. "You could refuse, and be cut off, disowned? I've been prepared for one kind of life. Mr. Kane, I don't know how to survive in yours. You're stronger than you think." She turned to look at him then. Really look at him. The afternoon light caught the planes of his face, the surprising green of his eyes. "How do you know?" "Because you're here," he said simply. "Because you ride out alone when you could stay safe behind walls. Because you see me when everyone else looks through me." The space between them seemed to shrink without either moving. Clara felt her heart hammering against her ribs, a wild thing recognizing another wild thing. "I should go," she whispered. "Yes." Neither moved. Then, as if pulled by invisible strings, she swayed toward him. His hand came up, fingertips barely grazing her cheek, the touch so light she might have imagined it. But the warmth was real, the calluses catching slightly on her skin, and she closed her eyes at the sensation. Clara. Her name on his lips was prayer and curse combined. She opened her eyes, saw her own desperate want reflected in his. Then reality crashed back, the sound of horses approaching, voices carrying on the wind. They stepped apart quickly, but not quickly enough. Her groomsman, Samuel, rounded the cottonwoods with 2 other riders from town. His eyes took in the scene, narrowed with suspicion. "Miss Whitmore, your father's looking for you." "Of course," she said, proud that her voice remained steady. "I stopped to water Belle and found Mr. Kane here. He was kind enough to check her hooves again." Samuel's expression said he wasn't fooled, but he knew his place. The other riders, though, were young men with too much time and their father's money. One of them, Theodore Baxter, looked between Clara and Elias with growing understanding and disgust. Keeping company with saddle tramps now. "Clara," Theodore's voice dripped contempt. "Your father know about this?" "Watch your tongue," Elias said quietly. Theodore's hand dropped to his gun. "You threatening me, drifter?" "Theodore," Clara's voice cut like ice. "I'll remind you that Mr. Kane works for Mr. Morrison, who supplies horses to half this county, including your father. I'd think carefully before causing trouble." The moment stretched taut. Then Theodore laughed, ugly and knowing. "Just being neighborly. Clara, wouldn't want you getting the wrong kind of reputation before your big announcement." They rode back to town in tense formation. Clara surrounded by her would-be protectors. She didn't look back, couldn't risk it, but she felt Elias's gaze follow them until the cottonwoods swallowed him from view. That night, she stood at her bedroom window, looking out over the lights of Mercy's Bend spread below like fallen stars. Somewhere out there, in a barn at Morrison's ranch, Elias Kane was looking at the same stars. The thought shouldn't comfort her, but it did. A knock at her door interrupted her reverie. Her father entered without waiting for permission, his face set in lines of controlled fury. "Theodore Baxter paid me a visit," he said without preamble. "Made some interesting observations about your riding habits. Theodore Baxter is a spoiled gossip who saw you alone with a hired hand." Her father's voice rose. "Do you have any idea what you're risking? What I've built for this family?" "What you've built?" Clara repeated. "Yes, let's discuss that. The families you've foreclosed on, the land you've seized, the men you've driven to." The slap came so fast she didn't see it, just felt the burst of pain across her cheek. They stared at each other, both shocked. Her father had never struck her before. "You will not see that man again," he said, voice shaking. "You will marry Wallace Hartley, and you will be grateful for the opportunity. Or I will have that drifter run out of town on charges that will see him hanged. Do you understand?" Clara held her hand to her burning cheek, tasted copper where her teeth had cut the inside of her mouth. "I understand perfectly." He left her standing there, the threat hanging in the air like smoke. Clara sank onto her bed, mind racing. She'd been naive to think their meetings could remain secret, naive to think her father wouldn't use Elias against her. But as the moon rose over the desert, casting everything in silver light, Clara made a decision. She would not let her father destroy another innocent man. She would find a way to protect Elias Kane, even if it meant sacrificing herself to Wallace Hartley's cold bed and colder hands. She just needed to warn him first. One last time. One last moment of truth before she surrendered to a lifetime of lies. The morning after Clara's father discovered their meetings, Elias woke to find 3 men waiting by the corral. Not Morrison's men. These wore better clothes and carried their guns like men who used them for more than show. The leader, a scarred home with dead eyes, spoke without preamble. "You're Elias Kane." It wasn't a question. Elias finished rolling his cigarette, taking his time to light it. "Who's asking?" "Name's Carter, Mr. Whitmore pays me to solve problems. You've become a problem." The other two men spread out slightly, hands resting on their pistols. Elias noted their positions, the distance to cover, the rifle propped against the fence just out of reach. "Man's got a right to water his horse at a public creek," Elias said. Carter smiled, showing gold teeth. "Sure he does, but a smart man knows which creeks to avoid. Smart man might decide this town's getting unhealthy, might move on tonight, maybe California way. Climate's better there. And if he's not smart, well..." Carter's hand moved to his gun. A casual threat. Desert's full of men who weren't smart. Shallow graves and coyotes. That's what happens to men who reach above their station. They left him with bruised ribs and a split lip. Nothing that would show unless someone looked close. A warning. Professionally delivered. Elias spat blood into the dust and went back to work. But his mind churned with calculations. He could leave. Should leave. It's what he'd done before when trouble found him. But the thought of Clara facing her fate alone, of that light in her eyes dimming under Hartley's ownership, made something fierce and protective rise in his chest. That evening, as purple shadows stretched across the desert, she came to him. Not to the creek this time, but to the ranch itself, bold as brass or desperate as a cornered animal. She dismounted at the gates, and he saw her face was pale, eyes red-rimmed. "You have to leave," she said without greeting. "Tonight, my father has hired men." "Met them this morning." He touched his split lip. They made their point. "Oh, God!" Her hand rose toward his face, stopped inches away. "I'm so sorry. This is my fault. No." He caught her hand, held it. "Your father's choices aren't your fault. Please." Tears ran down her cheeks now, and he saw the bruise on her face that powder couldn't quite hide. "Please just go. I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me." The sight of that bruise changed everything. Elias felt something cold and dangerous settle in his chest. The same feeling he'd had before he'd broken the judge's nephew's jaw. "He hit you. It doesn't matter. It matters." His voice came out rough, barely controlled. "A man who hits his own daughter is the same man who can have you killed with a word." Clara pulled her hand free, stepped back. "I've made my choice. I'll marry Hartley, be the dutiful wife, and you'll be safe. That's all that matters now. That's not living. Clara, that's just dying slow." She laughed, bitter and broken. "As opposed to you dying fast, at least this way. One of us survives. There's another way." "What? Run away together? With what money? To where? My father owns half the territory through his connections. We wouldn't make it to the state line." Elias moved closer, voice dropping. "I've got some money saved. Not much, but enough to get us started somewhere new. Colorado, maybe, or Montana. Places where a man can still make his own way. Elias." His name on her lips was half prayer, half sob. "I know it's not the life you're used to. It'll be hard, maybe harder than you can imagine, but it'll be yours, ours." She looked at him for a long moment, and he saw her teetering on the edge of decision. Then her shoulders slumped. "I can't. I'm not brave enough." "Yes, you are." "No." She backed toward her horse. "I'm my father's daughter, after all. Too used to comfort, too weak for your world. Forget me. Elias, find some good woman who can share your life without destroying it." She mounted and rode away before he could stop her, leaving him standing in the gathering dusk. But she'd left something behind, a folded paper that had fallen from her pocket. He picked it up, recognized her handwriting. It was a page from her diary, dated 3 days ago. "I dream of rough hands and gentle eyes. I dream of freedom that tastes like trail dust and starlight. I wake to silk sheets that feel like chains. God help me. I think I love him. God help us both." Elias stood there holding her heart in his hands, written in ink and tears. He made his decision then, standing in the dust of Morrison's ranch. He wouldn't run, not this time, but he wouldn't stay still either. That night, he sought out Tom Brennan, an old friend who ran freight between towns and knew every secret worth knowing in the territory. "I need information," Elias said, sliding a precious $20 gold piece across the saloon table. "About James Whitmore, About his business? Tom pocketed the coin, eyes shrewd. That's dangerous information you're asking for. I'm not looking for gossip. I need facts, things that could be proved in court. Court? Tom laughed. You think the law cares about one banker's crimes? Half the judges owe him money. Maybe, but his daughter might care, and she might need ammunition if she's going to fight him. Tom studied him for a long moment. You're playing with fire. Elias, men like Whitmore, they don't just ruin you, they erase you. I've been erased before, survived it. This is different. This is about a woman. Yes, Tom sighed, signaled for another whiskey. All right, but not here. Too many years. Meet me at Copper Creek tomorrow night, midnight, and Elias, come armed. The next day passed in tense normality. Elias worked horses, ate beans, mended tack, but his mind was on the coming meeting, on Clara's tear-stained face, on the feel of her hand in his. He didn't know that she had spent the day in her own kind of hell. Enduring Wallace Hartley's visit, the old man had pawed at her with liver-spotted hands, discussing her like breeding stock with her father. She'd smiled and served tea and felt pieces of her soul flaking away like old paint. That night, as Elias rode out to meet Tom, Clara stood at her window again. She'd made her choice. She told herself, the noble choice, the practical choice. So why did it feel like death? She didn't see the shadow moving below her window. Didn't know Theodore Baxter had been watching, waiting. He'd seen Kane ride out, had his own suspicions about where a man might go at midnight. Theodore had his own interests in keeping Clara available, his own hopes that Hartley might not survive another wife. The pieces were moving on the board, each player thinking they understood the game. But in the desert, under a cold moon, forces older than greed or love were stirring. The land itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see who would survive the coming storm. Elias reached Copper Creek to find Tom already there, nervous as a spooked horse. You sure you want to know this? Tom asked one last time. Tell me. Tom pulled out a leather folder, documents inside. Your girl's father, he's not just a banker. He's a thief and a murderer, legal-like. These are copies of foreclosure documents. But look close, the signatures, the dates. They've been altered. He's been stealing land for years, driving families out. Elias studied the papers in the moonlight. Names he recognized, families he'd known. The Parkers, the Santiagos, the Brennans. My brother, Elias said suddenly, the connection clicking. Patrick Kane. He had a small claim near Silver Ridge. Tom's face was grim. Foreclosed on 2 years ago. Your brother fought it, tried to prove the loan documents were forged. They found him at the bottom of a ravine. Called it an accident. The world went still around Elias. Patrick, who'd written him letters about his little plot of land, his dreams of bringing their mother's remains to rest somewhere peaceful. Patrick, who died broken and alone while Elias was locked in a cage for defending a stranger. There's more, Tom said quietly. But maybe you've heard enough. No. Tell me all of it. The second Mrs. Hartley. The one who fell down the stairs? She'd been asking questions about some inconsistent accounts at the bank. Whitmore and Hartley are partners in more than just this marriage arrangement. They've been running this game for years, stealing land, selling it to Eastern investors for 10 times what they paid, murder when necessary, all clean and legal looking. Elias folded the documents carefully, tucked them inside his shirt. Thank you, Tom. What are you going to do? What I should have done from the start, fight. But as he rode back toward town, Elias didn't know that Carter and his men were already waiting at the ranch, that Theodore had whispered poison in the right ears, that Clara was even now being locked in a room by her father's hand. The storm was about to break, and blood would water the desert before the dawn. The iron bars of Mercy's Bend's jail were still warm from the day's heat when they threw Elias into the cell. Sheriff Dawson, a man who owed his position to Whitmore's money, didn't meet his eyes as he turned the key. Nothing personal. Kane. The sheriff muttered. But that banker fellow's dead, and you were seen arguing with him yesterday. Elias touched his ribs where Carter's men had worked him over before dragging him in. Which banker? Harold Fisk. Shot twice in the back, left in his office. His safe was opened. Papers scattered everywhere. Elias's mind raced. Fisk had been one of Whitmore's junior partners. Nervous type who jumped at shadows. The kind who might have kept records of things better left unrecorded. I was at Morrison's all evening. Buck can vouch for me. Buck's conveniently absent. Rode out this morning on business. Won't be back for a week. Dawson finally looked at him. You're being set up, boy. We both know it, but knowing and proving are different animals in this town. The sheriff left him in the dark with his thoughts. Through the barred window, Elias could see the Whitmore house on the hill, windows glowing like eyes. Was Clara there? Did she know what her father had done? The answer came near midnight when he heard commotion outside. Horses, men's voices, the clink of bottles. The door burst open and Carter walked in, whiskey on his breath, cruel satisfaction in his eyes. Well, the horsebreaker, caged at last. He pulled a chair close to the bars, sat down like a man settling in for entertainment. Shame about Fisk. Man should have minded his own business. You killed him. Me? Carter laughed. I was playing cards at the Golden Eagle, dozen witnesses. You, on the other hand, were seen near the bank. Theodore Baxter saw you clear as day. I was at the ranch. Were you? Funny how memory plays tricks. Maybe you'll remember different after we talk a while. What followed was a systematic lesson in how pain could be delivered through iron bars. Carter knew his business, knew how to hurt a man without leaving marks that would show in court. He talked while he worked, casual as a man discussing weather. Miss Clara's getting married tomorrow. You know, move the date up, given recent events. She asked about you. Sweet thing. Her daddy told her you'd confessed. Said you'd been stealing from the bank all along, using her to get information. Elias spat blood through the bars. Catching Carter's boot, the man's face went cold, and the next blow sent Elias to his knees. She cried pretty when she heard, but she'll get over it. Hartley'll help her forget all about her rough-handed hero. They left him crumpled on the cell floor, ribs screaming, face swollen. But worse than the physical pain was the thought of Clara believing their lies, thinking he'd used her. He dragged himself to the window, looked up at those glowing windows, and did something he hadn't done since his mother died. He prayed, miles away. Clara wasn't praying. She was systematically going through her father's study while he met with wedding preparations downstairs. Her face was set in hard lines. Grief crystallized into purpose. She didn't believe her father's story about Elias, couldn't believe it. The man who'd touched her cheek with such reverence wasn't capable of that deception. She found what she was looking for in a hidden compartment behind portrait of her mother, ledgers in her father's careful hand, documenting years of theft and fraud. And there, recent entries about the Kane brothers, about forged loans and convenient accidents. Her hands shook as she read Elias's brother's name. Understood finally why fate had brought them together. Or perhaps not fate, perhaps justice, working its slow path through the desert. A sound at the door made her look up. Theodore Baxter stood there, smiling his snake smile. Looking for something? Clara? Get out. Now. Is that any way to talk to your future cousin-in-law? Oh yes, didn't you know? Hartley's promised me his niece. We'll be family soon. He moved into the room, closing the door behind him. Clara stood, backing toward the desk, but he was faster, catching her wrist. Always thought you were too good for the rest of us, he said, whiskey strong on his breath. But rolling in the dirt with that drifter showed your true colors. Maybe you'd like a preview of married life. Clara brought her knee up hard, catching him where it counted. As he doubled over, she grabbed the heavy glass paperweight from the desk and struck him across the temple. He dropped like a sack of grain. She didn't wait to see if he'd get up. Gathering the ledgers, she ran for the servants' stairs, her mother's old riding cloak thrown over her nightdress. The house was in chaos with wedding preparations. No one noticed one more shadow slipping through. At the stables, she saddled her mare with shaking hands. Where to go? The sheriff was her father's man. The judge, too. But there was one person in town who might help. One person her father had never quite managed to buy. Dr. Marcus Wellman lived above his practice. A cranky bachelor who delivered half the town and buried the other half. He answered her frantic knocking with a shotgun in hand, but lowered it when he saw her face. "Clara Whitmore, unless you're in labor or bleeding out, this better be important." "It's life and death," she said, and showed him the ledgers. His face grew grimmer with each page he read. When she reached the part about Elias's brother, about the murders disguised as accidents, he set the books down with careful deliberation. "Your father's a careful man," he said finally. "These prove he's a thief. Maybe, but murder? That's harder to sell. Then what do I do? They're going to hang Elias for a crime he didn't commit. Maybe not hang, but territorial prison's its own kind of death." The doctor moved to his medicine cabinet, began pulling out bottles. Unless what? Unless the prisoner's too sick to stand trial. Unless he needs immediate medical attention that the jail can't provide. He looked at her over his spectacles. "You understand what I'm suggesting, girl. We'd be breaking the law. The law's already broken." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Get those papers to Judge Reynolds in Fort Lincoln. He's straight as they come, and he hates your father. I'll buy you time." Within an hour, Dr. Wellman was at the jail, raising hell about unsanitary conditions and demanding to examine the prisoner. Sheriff Dawson, caught between the town's only doctor and Whitmore's orders, chose the path of least resistance. Elias was barely conscious when they reached him, and the doctor's examination was genuinely concerned. "This man's been beaten systematically. 3 broken ribs, possible internal bleeding. He needs immediate treatment. He stays here," Dawson insisted. "Then you'll be explaining to the territorial marshal why your prisoner died before trial. Your choice, Sheriff." They moved Elias to the doctor's office. Carter's men watching every step, but Clara was already gone, riding hard through the darkness toward Fort Lincoln. The ledgers that could save Elias or damn them all tucked safe in her saddlebags. In the doctor's surgery, Elias drifted in and out of consciousness. He dreamed of Clara, of rough hands and gentle touches, of a life that might have been. He dreamed of his brother, of justice delayed but not denied, and somewhere in the darkness between sleep and waking, he heard the doctor's voice, low and urgent. "Hold on, son. That girl of yours is fighting for you. Least you can do is stay alive long enough to see how it ends." The sun was rising by the time Clara reached the fort, her horse lathered with sweat, her hands bloody from the reins. She'd ridden through Apache territory, through darkness and fear, driven by something stronger than self-preservation. Love, she realized, tasting the word like foreign food, not the poet's version, all flowers and sonnets, but this raw, desperate thing that would see her risk everything for a man who'd shown her what freedom looked like. She just prayed she wasn't too late. The bounty hunter found them 3 days into their flight, at a cave halfway up Skeleton Ridge where desperate men had sheltered since the Apache Wars. Clara heard him coming first, the metallic clink of spurs against stone, the wheeze of a horse pushed too hard through thin mountain air. "Elias," she whispered, her hand finding his arm in the darkness. "Someone's coming." He was already moving, despite the pain from his barely healed ribs. They'd fled Dr. Wellman's under cover of darkness when word came that Judge Reynolds was riding hard from Fort Lincoln with federal marshals. Her father had put a price on their heads that would make them rich targets for every gun in the territory. The bounty hunter's voice echoed off the canyon walls. "Kane, I know you're up there. Seen your tracks plain as day. Why don't you make this easy on everyone?" Elias checked his revolver. 4 bullets left. They'd had no chance to resupply, living on creek water and what small game Clara could catch with her surprising skill with a rifle. "Stay back," he told her. But she was already moving to a position by the cave mouth, her own rifle steady. "We do this together," she said. And there was no arguing with that tone. The banker's daughter was gone, replaced by something harder and more beautiful. A woman who'd chosen her path and would walk it to the end. The first shot came without warning, chipping rock inches from Clara's head. She returned fire, cool as a veteran, while Elias moved to flank their attacker. The mountains threw echoes everywhere, making it hard to pinpoint the source. Then Clara made a sound, half gasp, half cry. Elias turned to see blood spreading across her shoulder, soaking through the man's shirt she wore. "It's nothing," she said through gritted teeth, but her rifle dropped from nerveless fingers. Something primitive took over Elias then. He came out of cover like an avenging angel, no longer caring about bullets or bounties. The hunter, a grizzled man named Corbett, barely had time to swing his gun around before Elias was on him. They went down in a tangle of limbs and curses, rolling dangerous close to the cliff edge. Corbett was bigger, but Elias fought with the fury of a man with everything to lose. The gun went off between them. Once, twice, and then Corbett was still, his blood mixing with the red mountain dirt. Elias stumbled back to the cave to find Clara trying to bandage her own shoulder with torn strips of petticoat. The sight of her, pale but determined, nearly broke him. "Let me," he said, taking over with hands that shook only slightly. The bullet had passed through cleanly, missing anything vital. But she'd lost blood, and the risk of infection out here was real. They needed help, needed shelter, needed a miracle. "There's a woman," Clara said, reading his thoughts. "Mrs. Garrison. She lives alone up past Widow's Peak. My mother helped her once. Years ago. She might—" It took them another day to reach the Garrison cabin, Clara growing weaker despite Elias's efforts. The old woman who answered their knock took one look at them and stepped aside without a word. Martha Garrison had buried 2 husbands and 3 sons, and learned that questions were luxuries the frontier didn't allow. She cleaned Clara's wound with carbolic acid and whiskey, stitched it with the steady hands of long practice. "Girl's got sand," she told Elias as Clara slept, fevered but fighting. "Question is whether you're worth what she's paying." "No," Elias said honestly, "but I'll spend my life trying to be—" Martha snorted. "Men and their grand words? Here's what matters. Can you keep her alive? Can you give her a life worth living when this is over? I don't know if it will ever be over. Her father, James Whitmore's got bigger problems than you 2 right now," Martha interrupted. "Had a visitor yesterday. Federal marshal asking directions to town. Seems someone delivered interesting documents to a judge who doesn't take kindly to murder and theft." Hope flickered in Elias's chest, but he'd learned not to trust it. Could be a trap. Could be. World's full of could-bes. But that girl chose you. Chose this life. You planning to honor that or spend your time looking over your shoulder? Clara's fever broke on the 3rd night. She woke to find Elias beside her, holding her hand, looking like he hadn't slept since they'd arrived. "Hey," she whispered. "Hey yourself." His voice was rough with exhaustion and relief. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been shot." She tried to smile. "But alive. We're alive. Thanks to you. That was a hell of a shot you made, covering me. My mother taught me. She said a woman in the frontier should know how to protect what's hers." Her fingers tightened on his. "And you're mine, Elias Kane, whether you like it or not." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "I love you," he said, the words coming easier than he'd expected. "Loved you since that first day. I think just took me a while to admit it." "I know," she said softly. "I love you too. Enough to give up everything, apparently." "You didn't give it up. They took it. There's a difference." "Is there? Because from where I'm lying, shot and sheltering in a stranger's cabin, it feels very much like I chose this. Do you regret it?" She was quiet for a long moment, and his heart stuttered. Then, "The only thing I regret is that we didn't run sooner, that it took blood and violence to bring us here." Martha appeared in the doorway, her presence as solid as the mountains. "If you 2 are done making calf eyes at each other, there's someone coming up the trail. 3 riders, moving careful-like." Elias was on his feet instantly, gun in hand, but Martha shook her head. "Put that away, boy. Unless I miss my guess, that's the law coming. The real law, not Whitmore's bought men." She was right. The lead rider wore a federal marshal's badge and a face carved from granite. He introduced himself as Marshal Stewart and got straight to business. "Elias Kane, I'm placing you under protective custody as a material witness in the federal case against James Whitmore. Miss Whitmore, your testimony has been invaluable, but I need to ask if you're prepared to face your father in court." Clara sat up despite Ellie's protests. Her chin lifting with inherited stubbornness turned to better purpose. "I'll face him. He killed good people, destroyed families. Someone needs to speak for them." The marshal nodded, respect in his weathered face. "Trial's set for 2 weeks hence. We've got Whitmore and most of his organization locked up, including a man named Carter who's singing like a church choir to save his neck. Your father's empire is finished. Miss." "It's not Miss anymore," Clara said firmly, "and that empire was built on blood. Let it burn." They spent another week at Martha's recovering, planning, existing in a strange bubble of peace while the world shifted around them. Clara's shoulder healed clean, leaving a scar she wore like a badge of honor. Elias's ribs finally stopped aching every time he breathed. On their last night, they sat outside watching the stars wheel overhead. The vast desert spread below them like a promise. "Where will we go?" Clara asked. "After the trial?" "Wherever you want. California, Oregon, maybe Montana. Somewhere we can start fresh. Somewhere with horses." He smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "Can't imagine life without horses." "Or without you," she said, turning to face him. "I need you to know. Elias, I didn't choose you because I was running from something. I chose you because you're what I was running to. Even if my father had blessed our match, even if I could have had you and kept my old life, I'd still choose this. Choose us." He kissed her then, under the vast western sky, and for a moment the past ceased to matter. There was only this, two people who'd found each other across an impossible divide and refused to let go. But tomorrow would come, as tomorrows always did, bringing with it the necessity of facing what they'd run from. The trial loomed, and with it the final confrontation with the man who'd shaped Clara's life through fear and greed. Neither of them could know that James Whitmore, sitting in his cell, was making his own plans. That hatred and twisted pride would demand one more blood price before the desert was done with them all. The courthouse in Fort Lincoln stood like a monument to justice, delayed but not denied. Clara entered on Elias's arm, wearing a simple gray dress that Martha Garrison had altered to hide the still healing shoulder. The crowd parted before them, some with respect, others with the hungry curiosity reserved for scandal. James Whitmore sat at the defendant's table, diminished but not broken. His eyes found Clara immediately, and she saw in them not remorse, but rage, carefully banked but burning still. Beside him, Wallace Hartley looked older, shrunken, his empire of silver and secrets crumbling with his Confederate's fall. "Don't look at him," Elias murmured, but Clara shook her head. "I need to. He had power over me my whole life because I was afraid to really see him. Not anymore." The federal prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Morse, had warned them it would be brutal. Whitmore had hired the best lawyers money could buy, men who specialized in turning victims into villains. But Clara had steel in her spine now, forged in flight and tempered by love. She took the stand with steady steps, placed her hand on the Bible, and spoke the truth that had been strangling her since childhood. "My father taught me to keep ledgers from the time I could write," she began, her voice carrying clear through the packed courtroom. "He said a woman should understand numbers, understand business. He never guessed I'd understand too well." She detailed the forgeries, the manipulated dates, the families driven from their lands. Her voice broke only once, when she spoke of Patrick Kane, of finding his name in her father's private accounts, marked with a notation, "Resolved permanently." "Did you know Elias Kane's connection to his brother when you began your association?" Whitmore's lawyer asked, his tone suggesting impropriety. "No, I loved him before I knew. Finding out only confirmed what I'd already learned, that my father destroyed everything good that crossed his path. You turned against your own blood for a drifter, Miss Whitmore." "What kind of daughter?" "The kind who chooses justice over blood." Clara interrupted. The kind who won't stand silent while innocent people suffer. If that makes me a bad daughter, I'll wear that judgment with pride. The cross-examination was brutal. As promised, they painted her as a rebellious child, a woman of loose morals who'd thrown away respectability for base desire. But Clara met each accusation with calm truth, and slowly the tide turned. The evidence was too strong, the witnesses too many. Carter took the stand and sang as promised, detailing murders made to look like accidents, threats delivered in darkness. The whole machinery of Whitmore's empire laid bare. Other witnesses followed, ranchers who'd lost everything, widows who'd been threatened into silence, a territorial official who'd kept his own records of suspicious deaths. Through it all, James Whitmore sat still as stone, his eyes never leaving his daughter's face. The verdict, when it came, surprised no one. Guilty on all counts, the judge, a man who'd seen too much frontier justice to be moved by wealth or threats, pronounced sentence with grim satisfaction. James Whitmore would hang. Wallace Hartley would spend his remaining years in territorial prison. As the marshals moved to take the condemned men away, chaos erupted. Whitmore lunged across the courtroom, not toward the exit, but toward Clara. He'd gotten hold of a derringer somehow. Prison guards could be bought even now, and his face was twisted with patricidal rage. "If I can't have you, no one will!" he screamed. The veneer of civilization finally, completely shattered. Time slowed. Clara saw the gun rise, saw her father's finger tighten on the trigger, saw her death in his eyes. Then Elias was there, shoving her aside, putting his body between her and the bullet. The shot was impossibly loud in the enclosed space. Elias spun and fell, blood blooming across his shirt. Another shot followed immediately, Marshal Stewart's rifle speaking its own kind of justice. James Whitmore crumpled, the derringer falling from lifeless fingers. "Elias!" Clara dropped to her knees beside him, pressing her hands against the wound high on his chest. Blood seeped between her fingers, hot and terrifying. "Hey," he managed, trying to smile through the pain. "Seemed to be making a habit of this." "Don't you dare," she said fiercely. "Don't you dare die on me now. We're supposed to have a life, horses and sunshine and—" Her voice broke. "Clara." His hand found hers, sticky with blood. "Worth it. You're worth—" "Shut up." Tears ran unchecked down her face. "Save your strength. Doctor, we need a doctor." Dr. Wellman was already pushing through the crowd, his bag in hand. He'd come for the trial, some instinct warning him his skills might be needed. He worked with swift efficiency, packing the wound, barking orders for space and clean water. "Bullet's still in there," he said tersely. "Need to get him to surgery now." They carried Elias out on a stretcher, Clara refusing to let go of his hand. The crowd parted silently. The drama of justice overshadowed by the older drama of love and sacrifice. In the doctor's surgery, Clara paced like a caged cat while Wellman worked. Catherine Moore sat with her. This federal prosecutor who'd seen too much but still believed in justice. "Your father's dead," Catherine said quietly. "Shot through the heart. He can't hurt you anymore." "He already has," Clara whispered. "If Elias dies because of him, that man's too stubborn to die." Martha Garrison interrupted, having appeared as if summoned by need. "Besides, he promised to give you a life worth living. Can't do that from a grave." The hours crawled by. Clara prayed to a God she'd half forgotten, bargained with the universe, promised anything if Elias would just live. The sun set, painting the sky the color of blood, and still Wellman worked, finally, near midnight. The doctor emerged, exhausted but triumphant. Bullet nicked the lung but missed the major vessels. He lost a lot of blood, and infection's still a risk. But if he makes it through the next few days— Clara sagged with relief, caught by Martha's strong arms. "Can I see him? He's asking for you. Been fighting the laudanum, refusing to sleep until he sees you're safe." She found Elias pale but conscious, his eyes tracking to her immediately. "Clara, I'm here." She took his hand carefully, mindful of his bandages. "I'm safe. You saved me. Again. Always will," he murmured. "The drug's making him honest. Long as I'm breathing, nothing touches you." "Then keep breathing." she whispered. Because I can't do this without you. He squeezed her hand weakly. The money from the reward, Carter's bounty, enough to start over. Shh, we'll worry about that later. No? His eyes fought to focus. Want to do this right. Clara Whitmore. Will you marry me? No, it's not romantic. But, yes. She laughed through her tears. Of course, yes. Though you're right. This is a terrible proposal. You'll have to do better when you're not full of holes. He smiled, the expression lighting his pale face. Deal. She stayed with him through the night, holding his hand, watching him breathe. Martha brought her food she couldn't eat. Catherine Morse brought news that Whitmore's other Confederates were being rounded up, that the stolen lands would be returned to their rightful owners or their heirs. There's a reward, Catherine said. For your father and Hartley, $15,000. It's yours by rights. Clara looked at Elias's sleeping face, at the bandages covering the latest price of their freedom. Give it to the families he destroyed. We'll make our own way. Catherine studied her with something like admiration. You're sure? My father's money came from blood. I won't build a life on it. She touched Elias's cheek gently. We'll have enough. Each other. Honest work. Freedom. What else do we need? 3 days later, when infection set in and Elias burned with fever, she might have reconsidered, as she bathed his face with cool water and whispered encouragements, promises, please. The thought of losing him now, when they were so close to freedom, nearly broke her. But Elias Kane was made of harder stuff than fever could burn away. He'd survived prison, survived beatings, survived bullets. He'd be damned if he'd let infection take him from the woman who'd given up everything to stand beside him. He woke on the 5th day, clear-eyed and hungry, to find Clara asleep in the chair beside his bed. She looked exhausted, shadows under her eyes. Her hair escaped from its pins. She was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Clara, he whispered. Her eyes flew open, immediately checking him over with anxious hands. You're awake, really awake. How do you feel? Like I've been shot, he said, echoing her words from the mountain. But alive. Good. Then she hit him, very gently, on his good shoulder. Don't ever scare me like that again. I promised to try, but Clara... He caught her hand. This is the life we're choosing. It won't always be safe or easy. I know. She laced their fingers together. But it'll be ours. That's all that matters. Outside, Fort Lincoln was waking up to a new day. The Whitmore Empire was dead, but from its ashes, something new was growing. 2 people who'd found each other across an impossible divide, who'd paid for their love in blood and tears, who'd chosen freedom over safety. It wasn't the ending Clara had been raised to expect, but as she sat there, holding the hand of the man who'd taught her what real love looked like, she knew it was the only ending she wanted. The winter came to Fort Lincoln like a white shroud, covering the violence of autumn in pristine snow. Elias drifted in and out of consciousness for days, his body fighting battles that no amount of frontier toughness could win alone. Clara never left his side, her world shrinking to the space between his bed and the chair where she kept vigil. She read to him from the few books the doctor kept, medical texts, mostly, but also a battered copy of Shakespeare that someone had left behind. Her voice became his anchor to the world, pulling him back whenever the fever tried to claim him. Clara, he mumbled one particularly bad night, his eyes unfocused. My mother, she's calling. No, Clara said firmly, gripping his hand. You stay with me. Elias Kane, your mother would want you to live. For Patrick, for yourself, for us. She talked to him about the future then, painting pictures with words of the life they'd build. A small ranch somewhere green, maybe Oregon where the rain came regular and the past couldn't follow, horses grazing in meadows, a garden she'd tend, evenings by the fire with nothing to fear but tomorrow's chores. We'll have a good life, she whispered, her tears falling on their joined hands. A simple life, but good. You just have to stay with me to see it. Sometimes he squeezed her hand. letting her know he heard. Other times he was lost in fever dreams, calling out names she didn't recognize, fighting battles she couldn't see. Dr. Wellman came and went, changing bandages, forcing medicine between Elias's lips. "He's strong," he told Clara, but she heard the doubt beneath the words. "Keep talking to him. Sometimes that's all that keeps them tethered." On the 7th night, when the snow fell so thick it muffled all sound from the street, Clara felt something shift. Elias's breathing, labored for so long, suddenly eased. His skin, burning hot for days, began to cool. She touched his forehead with trembling fingers, afraid to hope. His eyes opened, truly focused for the first time in days. "Clara, I'm here." She couldn't stop the sob that escaped. "I'm right here." "How long?" "A week. You've been fighting infection, fever. I thought—" She couldn't finish the sentence. He lifted his hand weakly, touched her cheek. "Told you, nothing touches you while I'm breathing." She laughed and cried at the same time, pressing her face into his palm. "You kept your promise. Always will." Recovery was slow, measured in small victories. The first time he sat up without help, the first steps across the room, the first meal he kept down. Clara was there for all of it, fierce as a mother wolf, gentle as spring rain. Martha Garrison had taken over the practicalities, finding them lodging, managing the legal aftermath of the trial. The older woman had decided they were hers to protect now, and heaven help anyone who suggested otherwise. "You'll need witnesses for the wedding," she announced one morning, bustling in with fresh bread and news. "Judge Morrison says he'll perform the ceremony whenever you're ready." Elias and Clara exchanged glances. In all the chaos, they'd almost forgotten his drugged proposal, her tearful acceptance. "You still willing?" Elias asked quietly when Martha had left them alone. "You could do better than a shot-up horsebreaker with no prospects." Clara moved to sit on the edge of his bed, careful of his healing wounds. "There is no better. There's only you. I can't give you what you had. Fine houses, servants, silk dresses." She silenced him with a kiss, soft but certain. "I had those things, remember? They came with a cage. You're giving me freedom. Elias, you're giving me choice. You're giving me love that doesn't demand I be less so you can be more." "Clara, the answer is still yes," she said firmly. "Unless you're trying to back out?" "Never." He pulled her carefully against his good side. "Just making sure you know what you're choosing. I know exactly what I'm choosing. Who I'm choosing." She rested her head on his shoulder, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her cheek. "When you're healed, we'll stand before the judge and make it legal. But in my heart, I'm already yours." They were married 3 weeks later in Dr. Wellman's parlor, snow falling soft outside the windows. Clara wore a simple blue dress that Martha had sewn. Elias his one good shirt carefully mended. The guests were few. Martha, the doctor, Catherine Morse, Marshall Stewart, and, surprisingly, Buck Morrison, who'd ridden through a blizzard to stand as Elias's witness. "Always knew you were trouble," Buck said, grinning as he shook Elias's hand. "Just didn't know you'd bring down the whole damn territory's corruption with you." Judge Morrison performed the ceremony with simple words that held more weight for their plainness. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Clara saw tears in Elias's eyes that he didn't try to hide. Their wedding night was spent in the small cabin Martha had prepared for them at the edge of town, away from curious eyes and wagging tongues. They came together carefully, mindful of healing wounds both physical and otherwise. It was nothing like the desperate encounters of their courtship, all fire and urgency. This was slower, deeper, a claiming that went beyond skin. "My wife," Elias murmured against her throat, testing the words. "My husband," she replied, and felt him smile. Later, as they lay entwined watching snow fall past the window, Clara traced the new scar on his chest. "This makes 2 bullets you've taken for me? Worth every one." "No more," she said seriously. "We've shed enough blood for this, love. From now on, we live quiet." He kissed her forehead. "Yes, ma'am." But the past wasn't quite done with them. 2 days later, a lawyer arrived from Mercy's Bend with documents and a locked strongbox. Mrs. Kane, he said, clearly uncomfortable. I represented your mother's family in certain matters. There was a trust established by your maternal grandmother that your father couldn't touch. It was to come to you on your marriage or your 25th birthday, whichever came first. Clara stared at the papers, seeing her grandmother's spidery signature. I never knew. Your father made certain of that, but with his passing, there was no one to contest the terms. The lawyer set the strongbox on the table. $10,000 in gold certificates. Not a fortune, but enough for a fresh start. After the lawyer left, Clara and Elias sat looking at the box like it might bite. Your grandmother's money. Elias said finally. Clean money. Money for a future she wanted me to have. Clara opened the box, touched the certificates with wondering fingers. Enough for that ranch in Oregon. Enough for horses and seed and a life without looking over our shoulders. You're sure? We could make it without... I'm sure. She closed the box, looked at him with clear eyes. This isn't my father's blood money. This is my grandmother saying she knew I'd need to escape someday. We'll take her gift and build something worthy of it. They left Fort Lincoln as winter gave way to spring. The certificates sewn into Clara's corset, their few possessions in a wagon Elias had rebuilt with his own hands. Martha wept when they said goodbye, pressing preserves and advice on them in equal measure. You write, she commanded. Let me know you're safe, that you're happy. We will, Clara promised, embracing the woman who'd been more mother to her in months than her own had been in years. They traveled slow, Elias still regaining full strength, Clara learning the rhythms of life on the trail. At night, they camped under stars so vast it made their troubles seem small. Days were filled with distance, with the creak of wheels and the steady clop of horses. No regrets? Elias asked one evening as they sat by their campfire. The vastness of the untamed country spread before them. Clara looked at him, her husband, her choice, her freedom, and smiled. Only that it took us so long to get here. They made love that night under the open sky, the desert bearing witness to promises that needed no words. And when morning came, they loaded their wagon and continued west, toward Oregon and whatever future they would build with their own hands. Behind them, the past lay buried under winter snow and spring growth. Ahead waited a life neither could have imagined when a drifter rode into Mercy's Bend and locked eyes with a banker's daughter across a dusty yard. But that's the way of love in wild places. It comes like a storm, washing away what was, leaving only what's strong enough to endure. And Clara and Elias Kane, tested by fire and blood, betrayal and bullets, had proved they were strong enough for whatever came next. The small ranch sat nestled where the forest met the meadow, 15 miles outside Cedar Falls, Oregon. A year had passed since Clara and Elias Kane had driven their wagon up the rutted track and seen the abandoned homestead that would become their salvation. Now, as Clara stood in her vegetable garden, dirt under her fingernails and sun on her face, she could hardly recognize the woman she'd been. The silk-clad banker's daughter was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone real. Her hands, once soft as butter, now bore calluses from the hoe and rains. Her skin, once powder pale, had been kissed golden by honest work under open skies. Clara, Elias called from the corral where he was working a young mare. Come see this. She walked over, wiping her hands on her apron, a practical garment she'd have dyed before wearing in her old life. The mare was a beauty, black as midnight with a white star on her forehead. She's ready, Elias said with quiet pride. Gentle as a lamb, but with fire when you need it. Fetched a good price from the mayor's wife in town. Their horse business had grown slowly but surely. Elias had a gift, and word spread. He didn't just break horses, he gentled them, taught them trust. Men came from 3 counties over to buy Kane-trained mounts. That's wonderful, Clara said, but Elias knew her well enough to catch the distraction in her voice. What is it? He climbed through the fence, came to her with that concerned look that still made her heart flutter. I'm late, she said simply. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by joy and terror in equal measure. How late? 2 months, maybe more. She took his hand, placed it on her still flat stomach. I think we're going to have a baby. Elias. He pulled her against him, buried his face in her hair. She felt him tremble and knew he was thinking of all they'd survived. All that could still go wrong. Hey, she said, pulling back to see his face. This is good news. The best, he agreed, but worry lingered in his eyes. I want to do right by you both, give you everything. You already have, she said firmly. Look around. Elias, we have a home, honest work, love. What else could a child need? That night, they sat on their porch watching the sun paint the sky crimson over their land. The violence of their beginning seemed like another lifetime, though the scars remained. His from bullets, hers from choices. Do you ever miss it? Elias asked quietly. The fine things, the easy life. Clara considered, rocking slowly in the chair he'd built with his own hands. I miss my mother sometimes. Wonder if she'd have been proud or horrified by what I've become. But the rest? She shook her head. That life was killing me slowly as your brother's bullet would have killed you quick. This is living. Elias, this is real. He took her hand, kissed her work-roughened palm. I love you, Clara Kane. And I love you, Elias Kane. They were disturbed by hoofbeats on the road. Both tensed, old habits died hard, but relaxed when they recognized the rider. It was Samuel, the former groomsman from the Whitmore household, carrying mail from town. Letter for you, Mrs. Kane, he said, tipping his hat. From Fort Lincoln. Clara recognized Martha Garrison's handwriting immediately. She read aloud while Elias leaned against the porch rail, listening. Dearest Clara and Elias, spring has come again to Fort Lincoln, and with it, changes. The old Whitmore house has been converted to a school for the county's children. I thought you'd like that. Clara. From a monument to greed to a place of learning. Wallace Hartley died in prison last month. He went unmourned but not unpunished. The lands stolen by your father and his cronies have been returned to their rightful owners where possible. The Kane family plot near Silver Ridge has been restored. Elias, if you ever wish to visit your brother's grave, but enough of the past. I trust this letter finds you well and happy. Dr. Wellman sends his regards and says to tell Elias that scars are proof of survival, not shame. Catherine Morse has been appointed federal judge, the first woman so honored in the territory. I think of you often, my dear ones. You showed an old woman that love can indeed conquer all. If the lovers are brave enough, be happy, be free. That is victory enough over those who would have caged you. With love. Martha. Clara folded the letter carefully, tears on her cheeks but a smile on her lips. She's right. We won. No, Elias corrected, pulling her to stand, holding her close as darkness settled over their land. We lived. That's better than winning. The stars came out one by one, diamonds scattered across black velvet. In the barn, horses nickered softly. From the forest came the call of an owl, hunting in the darkness. Inside Clara, new life grew, product of love that had survived everything the world could throw at it. They went inside, to the bed they'd shared for a year now, to the quiet life they'd built from ashes and determination. The passion between them had evolved from desperate fire to steady warmth, no less intense for being sustainable. Later, as they lay entwined, Clara traced the scars on his chest in the moonlight. No regrets? He caught her hand, kissed each finger. How could I regret the path that brought me to you, to this? She smiled in the darkness. We've come so far from that dusty ranch where you first saw me. You were wearing green, he remembered. Looked like a sage plant in a desert, all wrong and all right at the same time. You were working a stallion, she countered. I thought I'd never seen anything so beautiful as your hands on those reins, so gentle with all that power. And now I know I was right. She shifted to face him fully. Elias, I need you to know, I've never been happier than I am right now. In this bed, In this house we built, carrying your child. My father tried to tell me this life would be beneath me, but he never understood. There's nothing low about honest love, honest work, honest living. He was quiet for a long moment, and she knew he was fighting emotion. This man who'd faced down gunmen without flinching still struggled with the depth of what they'd found together. "You saved me," he said finally. "Not from bullets or hanging, but from becoming the kind of man who could only see the world through iron bars, real or otherwise. You gave me something to fight for besides survival." We saved each other. Clara corrected. "That's what love does, makes us brave enough to be who we really are." They made love then, slow and deep, mindful of the new life between them. And when exhaustion finally claimed them, they slept entwined, safe in the knowledge that whatever tomorrow brought, they'd face it together. The sun rose over the Oregon mountains, painting their small ranch in shades of gold and possibility. In the garden, Clara's vegetables pushed through dark soil toward the light. In the corral, Elias's horses grazed peacefully, waiting for his gentle hands. In the house, two people who'd paid in blood for their freedom woke to another day of the life they'd chosen. It wasn't the stuff of fairy tales. There would be hard winters and failed crops, difficult births and lean years. But there would also be laughter and love. Children raised in freedom, honest work rewarded with honest profit. Clara stood at her kitchen window, watching Elias head to the barn for morning chores. He moved easier now. The old wounds finally just memory instead of daily pain. She placed a hand on her stomach, imagining the child growing there, born free, born loved, born without the weight of others' expectations. "We made it," she whispered to the morning. "Despite everything, we made it." And in the barn, Elias Kane worked with horses and hummed an old tune his mother used to sing. A man at peace with his past and in love with his future. The wild desert that had brought them together was far away now, but its lessons remained, that love could bloom in the harshest ground, that freedom was worth any price, and that sometimes, against all odds. The drifter wins the lady, and they live to tell the tale. The mountains stood witness to their quiet happiness, and the Oregon sky blessed them with gentle rain. Somewhere, Martha Garrison was smiling. Somewhere, the ghosts of Patrick Kane and Clara's mother were at peace, and in a small ranch where the forest met the meadow, two survivors of Mercy's Bend's violence were writing a different story, one of healing, hope, and the kind of love that makes all the suffering worthwhile. Thank you for listening to our tale of love and redemption in the Wild West. If you've enjoyed Clara and Elias's journey from the dusty streets of Mercy's Bend to their peaceful Oregon ranch, please take a moment to let us know where you're listening from, whether it's by a cozy fireplace or during your daily commute. Subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of romance and adventure from the American frontier. And don't forget to share your thoughts about Clara and Elias's story in the comments below. Until we meet again around the campfire, partners.